Audi. I'm a professor for public relations and corporate communications at Quadrga University in Berlin. And today I'll be talking to you about podcasts. Now, several years ago, I started to toy with the idea of having a podcast. I am an avid listener of podcasts, and I used to commute to the office. I had about an hour every day, and I love to listen to two podcasts in particular. One of them is called Hidden Brain and talks about psychology, science, and research, and the other is called This American Life. Now, the first is a research-focused podcast. Where I can read out as in later, I can find out about the latest developments into psychology research and then bring them to my classroom. This American Life sits somewhere in between narrative journalism and a little bit of radio journalism, storytelling. And it covers everything from how we feel and interesting games to current affairs and politics. They're highly, highly well produced. They do have big teams behind themselves. So they're, from an audio perspective, they're very, very enjoyable. They're immersive and they're captivating. So of course, my question was, how could I come with something like this that my students would enjoy? Now, I teach here at the university. I teach part of MBA degrees, and our students are all full-time employed, so they're incredibly busy. And they might not have the time to all the time, go through books and libraries and the like. So anyways, fast forward. I do have a podcast right now. It's called Women in PR. And it is something that I've never dreamed of having. But Regina Körner from professionalpodcast.com, who is producing the company, so I'm not doing this on my own. She and I had a conversation a couple of years ago, and then she suggested that we would give it a go. And so I'm going to show you a little bit how it started. So I thought this was about the stories and journeys. So when I drafted this for her, I wrote it all down. I said, look, here's the idea that I have. Here's how I'd like the format to be. And you have a variety of formats. They can be, we think that the easiest is probably one-on-one interviews. Then we have panels of, conversations. And then you have more thoroughly prepared shows, and they are shows when you have acts or different sort of mini content bites within that. So I thought of that. I thought of the format, the audience, how to reach them. I also told her, what inspired me at the time, and the competition. And this is very, very important. The competition back in the day were just a bunch of podcasts, to be honest. So 2018, 2017. Whereas right now, if you want to know, so back in 2018, there were about 500,000, so 500,000 reported podcasts. Whereas right now in 2021, we have more than 2 million. And so that should give you an impression of how busy this audio space has become, and how much how much more effort someone needs to put into getting people's attention. So my podcast, I think for a small podcast where it's just me talking with a bunch of researchers and a bunch of successful women in public relations, asking them what makes you successful, what is it that you're worried about, with no marketing budget whatsoever, I think we're doing well. So this is the lowest of cost, with professional support a little bit in the background. But there are other podcasts out there that are incredibly successful, that are produced by communication teams. And the reason they're successful comes because of a mixture of having a niche idea, having a clear community that they're defining, and having a little bit of support when it comes to content, in terms of, getting it to be seen. So here's one of them. It's from the European Investment Bank. It's called Climate Solutions. And Climate Solutions, as you see now, they have a bunch of awards from last year. This year they also won the Digital Communication Awards, if I'm not wrong, which we're running here in Berlin. But they come and look in each one of their episodes about challenges, solutions, and comes up with what an investor, what someone who is a client of the European Investment Bank or a policymaker working with the European Investment Bank, what is it that they can do? And what's very smart about this is that you can see that we see their podcast with a designated website, so the content can be found. Every episode then comes up kind of as a blog post, and it has transcripts, so it's searchable, and that enhances search. And all of these elements do definitely contribute to increasing visibility and searchability of the content. Now, it's not an internal podcast. It's not something that they think of, this is closed, it's only for our internal audience to see. But most certainly, this is a rather bespoke audience. Another very interesting podcast is the one from JP Morgan. And you can see a pattern here, right? They look at technology, and in this case about how they use it and how they think it's important. The topics are quite recent and of great interest, but then again, the way that they're delivered, as you can see, they come up with backup in the sense, they do have transcriptions, they do have searchability content. So you can see already the difference between my podcast, where I just put the episodes up and I share them on LinkedIn and I share them with our students, and these ones here where there's an entire curation and curation effort. Now, when it comes to topics, I'd like you to think a little bit beyond, right? So mine is in a sense niche because we're looking at academics and research that is not into the mainstream. But if you're working with an organization and are trying to think, who can I reach with? The question is, why would they care? And what is the story you want to tell? And the zoo in Zurich, so in Switzerland, has a Backstage Podcast, which is so interesting, right? But you can find out how you can feed elephants and, into how they organize their zoo and so on. Equally, Audi has a podcast that is just for their employees. So in this case, and it's called Audi Mitarbeiter Podcast. This is employees of Audi. It's very much about people who love the brand, but even more so about people who are invested, who work with Audi. And so in this case, it's very much about topics that are relevant for the organization. And finally, if you want, here's another CEO, for instance, who he himself then goes and talks about, how he sees the future and what he would consider to be interesting. So as you can see, you don't necessarily have the CEO as a spokesperson for the organization and having a podcast, but you can. Equally, you don't necessarily have to think of your podcast as being always for a very wide and open audience. You can also have it just as a piece of content, if you want, as an alternative piece of content that supports you in reaching out with a particular stakeholder group. So it can be very specialist and very niche. Now, this brings us to, how do you know it's successful? And Shane Barker has a list here of tools, of apps that would help you track podcasting. Most of the platforms will help you out as well. But the moment you host your podcast, so you upload your podcast like a video, when you upload your podcast somewhere and then you share it on multiple other platforms, that tracking becomes complicated. So in this case, do consider reaching out to someone who has experience, and do check these platforms out. We're running out of time, and so I leave here with you another podcast, which is a conversation that I've had a couple of weeks ago with Monique Zitnik, who is a member of the IABC, and Regina Körner, about podcasts, about what, the sort of technology you need, the easiest versions versus the paid versions when you have a team and when you don't have a team. So I leave this here with you. I'm going to share all the links with you, and then you can listen to them all. You can reach out to me on annaadi.net. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I'm very, very much looking forward to your questions.